It's not that long ago that extreme poverty shocked the world. Every day, the internet throws images of inequality in our faces that seem impossible to believe. Entire families with nothing to eat, nothing to wear, and nowhere to live, forced to survive in inhumane conditions. But today, Bello Mundo is going to take you to a reality that will shatter everything you think you know. Our destination is Kibera in Kenya, the largest slum in Africa and perhaps the world. A place where tin houses share space with mountains of garbage, open sewage, and a suffocating mixture of human and animal excrement. Here, corpses lying forgotten in the alleyways complete the horror scenario. Are you prepared to face head-on a reality that few have the courage to confront? What you'll see here will challenge all your concepts about misery, survival, and humanity. Number 1. Location and geographical data. Kenya is like a masterpiece of nature that defies any label. Located in East Africa, right on the equator, this country of more than 580,000 square kilometers seems to have gathered a little piece of every scenery in the world. Let's start with the coastline, bathed by the Indian Ocean, where beaches like Diani and Watamu shine with their white sands and crystal-clear waters. It's the kind of place that looks like it's straight out of a postcard, with coral reefs sheltering marine life that enchants divers from all over the world. Inland, things get even more dramatic. The Rift Valley cuts through the country from north to south, creating a natural spectacle with cliffs, dormant volcanoes, and alkaline lakes that attract thousands of flamingos. Mount Kenya is another place that couldn't be left out. With its 5,199 meters of altitude, it not only lends its name to the country, but also displays a landscape that mixes glaciers, yes, snow in Africa, and savannas in the distance. It's something so unique that you have to see it to believe it. Speaking of savannas, these golden plains are practically the soul of Kenya. With their solitary acacia trees and iconic wildlife, they are the perfect setting for the Big Five: lion, leopard, elephant, rhino, and buffalo. Places like the Masai Mara and Tsavo National Park are true sanctuaries for those who want to witness nature in its purest form. And if that's not enough, there's also the Great Migration, when millions of wildebeest and zebras face hungry crocodiles to find better pastures. But Kenya is not just savanna. In the north, deserts bring an arid beauty, while in the south, rainforests hide unique species. And in the far west is the giant Lake Victoria, one of the largest sources of fresh water in the world, which the country shares with Uganda and Tanzania. Perhaps that's why Hollywood has fallen in love with this place. Productions such as Between Two Loves, with Meryl Streep and Robert Redford, and Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, The Origin of Life, with Angelina Jolie, have chosen Kenya as their setting. Number 2. History. Kenya's history is as remarkable as its geography. Since the days when the Rift Valley was home to our first ancestors, this land has played an important role. Over the centuries, it became a meeting point for diverse cultures, with Bantu, Nilotic, and Arab traders turning the region into a veritable center of exchange and influence. However, the 19th century brought major changes with British colonization. Fertile land was taken from local populations to favor European settlers, while the majority of Kenyans were pushed into precarious living conditions, working on plantations or building railroads. These inequalities left deep scars that still affect the country. Independence came in 1963, but that didn't mean the end of the difficulties. Despite being one of the most promising countries in East Africa, Kenya still faces challenges such as poverty, unemployment, and social inequalities. These problems are even more visible in rural areas and on the outskirts of big cities, such as Nairobi, which is our next destination. Number 3. Nairobi, the capital of tin houses. Nairobi, Kenya's largest city, is the kind of place that mixes a bit of everything. Founded in 1899 as a simple support point for the railroad, it didn't take long for it to grow and become the capital in 1907. Today, with over 4 million inhabitants, it is one of the busiest cities in East Africa. On the one hand, the urban setting surprises with the national park next door, where lions and rhinos live free. An urban safari that is unique in the world. There's also the National Museum, which celebrates the country's history and culture, and the Giraffe Center, a refuge dedicated to protecting the Rothschild giraffe, an endangered species. But like any large metropolis, the challenges are obvious. Disorderly growth has resulted in areas like Kibera, where life is very different from the modern, office-filled center. Number 4. Kibera. Kibera is one of the largest informal settlements in the world, known for its stories of challenges and contradictions. Remember the inequalities we talked about in the Kenyan capital? Well, Kibera is exactly that blue part on your screen right now. And look, right next to it, in the red part, is an exclusive golf course, frequented by people with high purchasing power. The separation is just a thin, almost invisible line. Around 2.5 million people live there, and if you remember that we mentioned that the city has just over 4 million inhabitants, you can understand the impact of this. Almost half of the population lives in this huge settlement. Just to put it into perspective, entire countries like Latvia have fewer inhabitants. The history of the region begins in 1918 during British rule. At the time, the land was distributed to Nubian soldiers as a reward for services rendered in the First World War and other conflicts. Before that, the site was a forest on the outskirts of the city, and the name comes from the Nubian word Kibera, which means forest or jungle. Over the years, especially after the country's independence, disorderly growth transformed the place into what it is today. Divided into 15 communities, such as Oriente Soweto, Gatwekera, and Makina, the settlement has attracted migrants from different regions, but has also brought enormous challenges. Most of the people who live there face extremely difficult conditions, with no access to basic services and infrastructure, as well as other difficulties that we are yet to explore. Number 5. Rental housing. When we talk about the difficulties here, we start with housing, or what we can call housing, since the reality is quite different. As we mentioned before, around 60% of the capital's population lives in this huge settlement, which occupies just 6% of the urban territory. And here's an important detail. The whole area belongs to the government. None of the residents own their own homes. This situation has historical roots. Over the last 75 years, the area has been occupied by minority groups and people excluded from the job market. Although the land is state-owned, the government has allowed the sale of plots and their commercial use, which has paved the way for something worrying: exploitation. In practice, this means that few people actually have formal ownership of the land or structures. It is estimated that only 1 in 10 people owns their own shack. Most residents pay rent to so-called landlords, who often don't even live in the area. Yes, you heard right. People pay rent to live in such precarious conditions. The amount is around €7 a month. Even so, many families have to share a single shack to make ends meet. These houses, if you can call them that, are on average 3.5 meters by 3.5 meters, built with mud walls, zinc roofs, and dirt or concrete floors. In communities like Mashimoni, considered one of the poorest in the area, mud huts and tin houses predominate. These materials are used because they are cheap, but they offer little protection against the heat, heavy rains, or the cold at night. The internal structure is extremely simple. In general, the houses have 1 or 2 rooms that are used for everything: sleeping, cooking, and sometimes storing the family's few belongings. Furniture is rare, and beds are often replaced by mats or mattresses on the floor. Ventilation is practically non-existent, leaving the rooms stuffy during the day and cold at night. When it rains, the dirt floor turns to mud, making conditions even worse. The lack of windows makes the interiors dark, even during the day. Electricity, when it exists, is obtained through clandestine connections, which increases the risk of accidents such as short circuits and fires. Like these real scenes appearing to you, showing desperate residents trying to put out the fire before it destroys more lives. Number 6. Lack of structure. The lack of basic services, such as electricity, running water, and sanitation, makes life even more difficult for those who live there. To begin with, only around 20% of the area has access to electricity. UN Habitat, the United Nations Human Settlements Program, is trying to change this by installing street lighting and connections for some shacks, but the cost of around 900 Kenyan shillings per shack is still out of reach for most families. Water is also a luxury. They don't even have taps at home. Until recently, there was no access to piped water, and residents had to collect water from the Nairobi Dam, which, as well as not being clean, caused outbreaks of typhoid and cholera. Today, 2 main pipes supply water to the community, one from the city council and one from the World Bank. But the water is not free for everyone. There are scattered community taps. While schools are exempt, residents pay around 40 cents per 20 liters, which may not seem much, but is a significant burden for those already living in extreme poverty. And access to toilets? Almost non-existent. Most residents have to share a single latrine, a hole in the ground with up to 50 shacks. When this latrine fills up, boys are hired to empty it, transporting the contents to nearby rivers or plots of land. And then there are the shared toilets in some areas, which are locked. To use them, you have to pay, which, for many, is simply not an option. As a result, those who can't afford to pay or can't find an alternative end up resorting to the street. There are also those who use plastic bags to go to the toilet and then dispose of them wherever possible, creating what are known locally as flying toilets. This, combined with the waste from animals such as pigs, cows, dogs, and cats, turns the streets into a real mess. And when it rains, the situation worsens dramatically. Human and animal waste, scattered garbage, and plastic waste mix with the mud, creating a scenario that looks like something out of an apocalyptic movie. Number 7. Unemployment, booze, and consequences. The lack of work in Kibera is a huge problem. With more than half the population unemployed, many start the day with a glass of chenga, a cheap and extremely strong alcoholic drink with more than 50% alcohol content. Not only is it very easy to find, but it is also improvised and often full of methanol, which makes it even more dangerous. And do you know how much it costs? Just 10 Kenyan shillings, or less than 20 cents a glass. It doesn't take long for drinkers to go completely off their heads. Alcohol abuse here has serious consequences. Fights, crime, and violence of all kinds are common. Some NGOs try to teach changa producers how to make the drink more safely, but it's a long battle full of obstacles. And changa isn't the only problem. Cheap narcotics, such as glue and solvents, are also everywhere. Young people and even children end up getting involved with these substances, trying to escape the harsh reality, but they only sink further into the situation. Another major challenge is reproductive health. Most men don't use condoms, and the figures are frightening. More than half of girls between the ages of 16 and 25 become pregnant. Most of these pregnancies are unplanned, and in many cases, the results are tragic. Number 8. Crime. Unlike what happens in many favelas and communities around the globe, where gangs often impose strict rules to avoid internal violence, here there is no such organization. Petty theft, robberies, and drug trafficking are common and difficult to control. Leaving building materials unattended, for example, is virtually certain to be taken. Even residents trying to rebuild their homes after storms face the risk of having everything destroyed again before they've even finished. In addition to petty crime, organized criminal groups operate in some areas, controlling chunks of territory and imposing their own rules. This presence further aggravates the difficulties of those already facing extreme conditions. But it's not just direct crime that's a concern. Kibera is also experiencing intense social and cultural conflicts. Rivalries between the Luo and Kikuyu tribes, for example, are a frequent problem. Both groups have their origins in western Kenya, but their cultural and historical differences, coupled with poverty and the scramble for scarce resources, end up fueling tensions that are often manipulated by politicians in search of support. And the divisions don't stop there. Within the community itself, there is resentment between those who have work and those who can't get a job. This inequality generates conflicts, feeding a sense of injustice and competition. The relationship between landlords and tenants is also a critical point. Many residents feel exploited by paying rents in precarious conditions and end up in conflict with the owners of the land or shacks. But in the midst of the chaos, there is also hope. Number 9. Light at the end of the tunnel. Tired of waiting for empty promises from politicians, many residents decided to act on their own to improve life in the community. Despite the absence of formal hospitals and schools, non-governmental organizations have made a significant difference. With a focus on public health, youth, and female empowerment, they create small changes that have a big impact. Some NGOs offer free health clinics, youth sports programs, and income generation projects, helping to build more sustainable community development. Others mobilize local resources to promote HIV awareness campaigns, organize cleanup efforts, and offer professional training. In addition, in 2009, the Kenyan government began a relocation program that seeks to provide more dignified housing for the residents of Kibera. The first phase of the project built 300 apartments, relocating around 1,500 people. These new buildings include basic infrastructure such as schools and markets, something that seemed like a distant dream to many. Is that enough? Not yet. The favela needs much more. Basic care, sanitation, education, security, property rights, and jobs are just the beginning. Not to mention something that should be simple: access to 2 meals a day. Even so, every small step is a light at the end of the tunnel for those living in such extreme conditions. And that concludes our journey through Kenya. We want to know what you thought. Let us know in the comments. What shocked you the most? If you enjoyed learning more about this impressive reality and want to continue exploring topics as striking as this one, don't forget to follow us and turn on your notifications so you don't miss the next videos. Thanks for being with us so far. See you in the next episode of our Bello Mundo adventure.